Woof woof! Hey guys, it's me Marcus, aka the Mad Dog, and thank you for watching this video. So last time I did a where to start on DC Comics and I was asking you guys for some suggestions of what you'd like to see. And one thing that got recommended quite a few times was for me to do a where to start on none other than the X-Men. Now it's impossible in today's day and age to not know who the X-Men are, but you might not have ever read any of the comics. And as well, you'll find that proper die-hard X-Men fans will only ever recommend you the stories that aren't really great for a new reader. So if you've not got much knowledge of the 60 or so years of history that have gone into this team, you might not actually know where exactly you can start. But don't worry, I've got quite a few titles here, and there will hopefully be at least one that will help you get into the Marvel side of the mutant universe. But just before I get into the list, I do just have to point out that this isn't a list of the greatest X-Men stories of all time. I'm doing the ones that are the best for the new readers. So it's got to find a way to introduce you into the characters, it can't be too laced in continuity, and more than anything, it's just got to be an enjoyable story. So let's just get into the list. These are in no order, but the first one that I wanted to point out was X-Men Grand Design. This only recently started getting released, and I mean within the last couple of years. But it's written and illustrated by Piskor, and it gives you quite an interesting look at the entire continuity. So if anything, this is best for sort of almost like a previously on the X-Men. So there's been 3 stories so far. There was the first one that was just called X-Men Grand Design, there was a second coming, and there's a third one called Extinction. I've only read the first one, and I just thought it was quite a neat, clean take on the X-Men. You get introduced to the main players, you get briefed on some of the storylines, but it's also brought to a contemporary standard, so if you don't really want to go back and read like the original Stan Lee stories, or maybe some of the Claremont stories, this would be the best gateway for you. And I mentioned this one first because I think once you've read X-Men Grand Design, you've got a good foundation to read other X-Men stories. Each mini story has only got 2 issues, it's come out in quite oversized paperbacks, and there's going to be a release of an oversized hardcover with the 3 stories so far, which of course I'm going to have to buy because I've got absolutely no willpower. But I had to mention this one first because it is the best gateway into the X-Men. My second pick for new readers is the Astonishing X-Men. This is a phenomenal story from Joss Whedon. Regardless of what you think of him as a result of the Justice League film, which is apparently all his fault even though most of the work was done by Zack Snyder, Astonishing X-Men is my favourite X-Men story, so I had to recommend it second because it is just the quintessential X-Men. The 24 or so issues that Joss Whedon and Cassaday did together is a complete X-Men story beginning to end. So you do need to know a little bit about Professor Xavier, Wolverine, Cyclops, Emma Frost, and a few other characters, but for me I think this is really great because it's got my main man Colossus in it. Colossus is my favourite member of the X-Men, and he's just given it a really good spotlight within Astonishing. The omnibus recently got reprinted, and although I don't really recommend buying an omnibus as your first time getting exposed to a story, it is a great story that I think you can confidently buy and have the entire story then in one hardcover. But the reason why I recommended this is because I think it opens a lot of doors for you X-Men wise. So I think it really gets to demonstrate how Cyclops is as a leader, you get to see how Wolverine interacts with the team, you get to see the Hellfire Club, which if you haven't really seen anything other than the X-Men movies, you might not even know who they are. There is a little bit of backstory and flashback which crossed over to the Uncanny X-Men by Claremont, but more than weighing the story down, I think it's actually a good gateway point if it is that you enjoy Astonishing X-Men and want to read more X-Men as a result of that. But as well, what it really did is have perfect art, but it also boiled down the characters to a minor team, so there's not like thousands of X-Men like it can feel like sometimes, and you don't need to remember all the minor characters. There's only really the 6 or so main members of the X-Men that you need to keep following, and because it's a tighter team, you actually get to follow them a bit deeper. So for me personally, and yeah, it might turn you off for the rest of the video, there is nothing better than Astonishing X-Men when it comes to your gateway into it. And if you are enjoying this video, or if you're leaving because you've already had 2 great suggestions, please just remember to leave a like, and if you haven't done so already, please just click that subscribe button and click the notification bell. But my third pick is going to be X-Men Mutant Genesis. This was the best-selling X-Men comic of all time, and I think issue 1 was actually the best single-selling issue of all time. But it's written by the granddaddy of X-Men, Claremont, and it's also got one of the best artists of all time in my opinion with Jim Lee. It was a way of refreshing the X-Men for the 90s, and it really just went along with a lot of steam. You can read the 7 main issues, but they did actually do quite a long run together that's getting reprinted in the omnibus format, and of course I'm not missing a second chance to pick that up. But I think this did a great job of actually exposing you to some of the X-Men members that you don't normally ever see. So you do get to see Archangel, you're introduced to Rogue and Psylocke, but you also, more than anything, just get peak Magneto. I love Magneto, he's probably my favourite villain of all time, and he was just great in this. You just have to look at the art to see how powerful they've made Magneto in this. And if you don't really want to spend any money on it, Amazon's actually got Mutant Genesis, the entire 7 issues of it, for free on Kindle Unlimited. Obviously you can go with the original colouring, or you can go with the new colouring that they did recently, but whichever colouring you go for, I think you're going to have a great time with this story. Now my fourth pick, and this is where people start getting their pitchforks out, I've got the first 33 issues of Ultimate X-Men. Now the reason why this is recommended on my list is because this was my first X-Men story. I absolutely love the Ultimate Marvel Universe. When I was growing up, this was like the Marvel Universe for me, because the Ultimate Universe didn't bother with any of the continuity that had weighed down the Marvel Universe for years already. So if you're a new reader and you've never had any kind of exposure to the X-Men, this would be a great way of just getting in there, reading some stories and learning about those characters. With the Ultimate Universe, yeah, you do have to take it with a pinch of salt that they did try and like modernize some things, that some worked and some didn't, but you will get introduced to the world of mutants. You'll learn some of the storylines that have gone on before, and you'll get introduced to these characters as well. And not just that, I think the Ultimate Universe gets a pretty bad rap when actually some of the stories are quite enjoyable. I'm not going to say that all of Ultimate X-Men was good, but the Mark Millar portion in particular was a stellar run. And what I always used to do with the Ultimate Universe, I would read the Ultimate version of a story first. So say for example we've got like Ultimate Death of Gwen Stacy, and then once I realised that I enjoyed that, I would go back and read the actual Marvel 616 Universe version of it. So for as much stick as we give the Ultimate Universe and we give Ultimate X-Men, it is a great way to get you into the universe and then help you branch into the main X-Men world. My fifth pick is going to be X-Men First Class. And now I don't mean the film, because obviously this is more about comics and stuff like that rather than the films, but there was actually a series called X-Men First Class, which in the early 2000s I believe it was, they actually went back and redid the origins of the original X-Men. So there's not going to be any Wolverine here, unfortunately there's not going to be any Colossus, but you get like the 5 main members of the X-Men. So you see Beast without his fur, you see Cyclops growing up, you've got Jean Grey, and I can't really remember the others off the top of my head. But if you're wanting that more traditional X-Men story, I think X-Men First Class would be the best one for you. This had really crisp, clean art that does actually feel like it was taken from a sort of 60s style and just modernised a little bit. It stays true to the characters throughout, and it does tell an engaging X-Men story even if it's something that's quite familiar. So as well, this could be good if you're wanting a refresh on the X-Men. Maybe you do know quite a bit, or maybe you've watched a lot of the films or the cartoons before and you're just wondering how you can get into the comics. The perfect bridge for you would be X-Men First Class. Now my sixth pick, and like I said these are in no particular order, I've got X-Men Age of Apocalypse. Now on the surface it sounds like this would be a difficult one for new readers, but I read Age of Apocalypse when I was quite new to the X-Men, and the reason why I recommend it is the same reason why I recommend Injustice to people trying to get into DC Comics, and it's because it's an alternate universe take on the X-Men. So the world's been completely flipped on its side. You've got people who are normally enemies working with friends, and vice versa. You've got Wolverine without a hand, you've got Magneto leading the X-Men, and then you've got this villain that's been introduced at the same time who's called Apocalypse. If you watch the X-Men Apocalypse film, you know nothing about this character just yet. He's so powerful and intimidating, and he's a massive threat for the entire universe. And although it is quite wordy and the art hasn't really aged well, I do think this is quite a good segue if maybe you were reading X-Men at that time and you haven't read any comics since and you want to find a way to get back into it. With a familiar yet different cast and a great villain and a story that spans for about 50 or so issues, I think this would be perfect if you want one of those X-Men events to get into. And from here, if you enjoy this, check out other X-Men events now that you've got a foundation of those characters. But I'm going to get into some of them a little bit later, so I'm not going to say any more here. Now the next one on my list is Wolverine and the X-Men. I'm not sure if this technically counts because on my shelf I'd put this with Wolverine, but it's got X-Men in the title, but for the sake of this video I'm going to include it. Now in particular, if you're a major Wolverine fan, if you really like Hugh Jackman, it might be the case that that's what you really want to see from an X-Men story. And sometimes understandably, Wolverine can often be a secondary character, but with Wolverine and the X-Men you're going to get a story that really focuses in on him as a character, whilst also seeing how the X-Men universe works. There may be some continuity that you need to know, like in particular in regards to why Wolverine's got such an active role, but other than that I think if you know a lot about Wolverine as a character, this is going to be the best gateway for you, because having him as that central character, he sort of works as a proxy to introduce you into the rest of this universe. So although there's some more obscure characters that you're going to learn about, and it might not be the quintessential X-Men, you know, it hasn't really got Cyclops or anything like that included, it's still going to give you at least enough of a foundation and give you a great story written by Jason Aaron to help you get into this universe without much issue. So yeah, this one's mainly on the list for the Wolverine fans who want to branch out into X-Men. Now my next pick, and this is one that I think a lot of people might disagree with me on, but I've got X-Men Schism. So yeah, on the surface it feels like this is the equivalent of recommending Civil War to somebody who's never read a Marvel comic. Or in movie terms it's the same as recommending Captain America Civil War to somebody who's never watched an MCU film. But for me, I always feel like stories where a team actually breaks up are actually good entry points into a series, because from there you're going to be given a new status quo, and X-Men Schism is mainly about a clash between Wolverine and Cyclops. And actually Wolverine and the X-Men, which I mentioned before, is kind of like the sequel to this. But for me, if this is one of the first X-Men stories that you read, I think you're going to learn a lot about the dynamic between the different characters within the X-Men universe, because you do get to to see the build up and why they end up fighting, and from there it's going to leave a lot of doors open for you. So you've got Wolverine and the X-Men. It did branch off so that Cyclops actually had his version of the X-Men as well. So although you may disagree with me on this one, I do actually think X-Men Schism is possibly one of the best events to get people into X-Men. Now my next one's a bit temperamental because it may actually not be on the list 5 years from now depending on how this pans out, but I've got Hickman's run of X-Men. I wouldn't advise you getting this in single issues because it's quite confusing, but these standard paperbacks that are coming out are doing a really good job of making sure that they've got it in chronological order. So volume 1 will actually have like issue 1 of House of X, issue 1 of Powers of X, and then volume 2 will have issue 2 of Powers of X and issue 2 of House of X. So that would be the way that I'd recommend getting into this, but Jonathan Hickman's one of those great writers that has a way of actually managing to absorb all the continuity but not let it bog his story down. So although there may be some characters that you don't actually know and you might have to read a bit into, I feel like for the majority of X-Men stories you'd be doing that anyway. But with this you're going to be able to follow the story as it's coming out and you're going to be able to engage in that active conversation within the X-Men community. It also feels like Jonathan Hickman's building up to something big in a similar way to what he did with Fantastic Four and Avengers and how that led into Secret Wars. So you might want to be on the ground level of this because it feels like for the last couple of years Marvel doesn't really want a lot to do with the X-Men. But now putting such a big high profile name like Hickman on it, it feels like Marvel understands that this is a team that they need to give attention to. And as well, with Marvel realising that they haven't really treated the X-Men with any kind of respect lately, it does actually feel like they've got a storyline that's going to help get more people in it because they alienated so many people before. But for me this is definitely one to watch, and I get the feeling like a couple of years from now this is going to be much bigger than it already is now. Now I'm going to cheat again with my next selection, but I've got the individual characters. Like yeah, it makes sense because when I was doing the DC Comics one, I didn't just recommend you DC Comics events, I recommended you individual stories about different characters. And it's the same for the X-Men because of course you've got Wolverine and you've got so many stories related to him. I'm probably eventually going to do a where to start on Wolverine, but there's some great runs that'll help you get into that universe there. You could also read Uncanny X-Force and learn about some of the characters. You could read some of the Gambit storylines from the 90s. As well, there was a great Rogue storyline that was written by Brian K. Vaughan who did like Y the Last Man, Saga and Ex Machina. So from watching any of the X-Men movies or the cartoons or anything like that, you found a character that you really like, it might be the case that you can just read one of their individual series and branch into the universe that way. But like I said, the X-Men universe is so diverse that I could actually come back and do individual where to starts for individual characters. So make sure you subscribed and you can see them when I eventually do them. Now I'm coming into my last couple of picks and this one didn't really get added to the list until quite recently, but I've got the New X-Men by Grant Morrison. On the surface I felt like this wasn't a great run for beginners, but looking back and having a flick through the omnibus that I recently brought, I do actually think that it would be great if you've got some kind of knowledge of the X-Men to begin with, because it did feel like Grant Morrison was trying to go off into a different direction, and I think there must be a couple of people that have read Grant Morrison's books, maybe some of his Vertigo titles, and you enjoy them, but you've never read an X-Men story before. In that case I do feel like New X-Men could be good for you. The only one with this is I'd recommend having some kind of X-Men Wikipedia open next to you whilst you're reading this, because there is some characters he does like to go with the more obscure ones that you might have never heard of. But regardless, considering this was nearly a 50-issue run, I think this would be great to give you one of them like long strand narratives from one writer about one team. And my last major selection that I had to put in here somewhere is of course the Uncanny X-Men by Chris Claremont. But to me this is like the era of comics that I never really read and enjoyed. However, Uncanny X-Men is like the exception to that rule. He introduced Wolverine, Storm, Nightcrawler and Colossus, and he incorporated it into the original X-Men and just went with his own story. Of course, yeah, there are individual storylines that you could get from this, so you could get Days of Future Past, you could get the Dark Phoenix saga, you could get God Loves Man Kills, you could technically get like Fall of the Mutants, Inferno, Extinction Agenda. But for me, why don't you just start at the beginning of this run and see how far you can get into it? We're quite lucky because Marvel actually are reprinting quite a lot of this run in the omnibus format. So for me, if you really want to get into X-Men, there's no better place to start than the start. The Stan Lee stuff hasn't really aged that well. I've only read about 2 issues and it just wasn't for me. But Uncanny X-Men, considering the fact that it is quite wordy when you compare it to like a modern day comic, still has the staying power so that I have to recommend it to you in this video. I'd be doing a disservice to you if I didn't. This is the X-Men X-Men run, so I think at some point it's important that you at least try this, and you might even get away with trying this as your first X-Men book. I think if you can get into the writing style, you won't have too much of an issue, and you will get introduced to the characters at the time when they were actually introduced. And I've got a bonus suggestion for here at the end. It isn't really a comic, but of course it's the 90s X-Men the Animated Series. We've all heard the theme song and we all know that it's great, but more than that, the series was great. It's currently all on Disney Plus, so if you're like me and you've paid £6 a month for Disney Plus and realise that there's not much on it to begin with, why not sit down and watch the X-Men Animated Series? I feel like this series is one of those rare ones that's great for new starters, but it actually respected people who read the comics. This had the best adaptation of the Dark Phoenix storyline, so why not watch the animated series, see which characters and storylines and villains that you liked, and go from there. Because let's be honest, there's probably quite a few comic collectors and X-Men fans that actually did start getting into it that way. So just because it came out in the 90s, it doesn't mean that that's not a viable strategy now. So check out a few episodes. If you're remotely interested in the X-Men, I can guarantee that you're likely to enjoy this. But those are all the ones that I've got, and like I said, this is my personal list that I think will help people get into X-Men, but you might have some of your own suggestions, so leave them in the comment section below so that we can help everyone. Or maybe just comment on what your first exposure to the X-Men was. I need to stop saying X-Men because I feel like it doesn't sound like a word anymore, but if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you didn't like this video, why did you get this far? Please click that subscribe button if you haven't already and just become part of the dog pack, and click that bell notification so that you never miss out on one of my videos. Share this video with your friends, some of which may be trying to get into X-Men as well. Check out my Instagram and my Facebook so that I can keep you up to date on some of the deals that I find out in the wild. But more than anything, just make sure that you keep safe, keep reading, and keep barking all you mad dogs, and I'll see you at the next video.